Usually when you look at a biography, there is this expectation of a straight, predictable line.
Oh, absolutely, like reading a map.
Yeah, exactly. You start at point A, you pick a career, you follow the highway to point B, and the map just points and says, this is who they are.
Soldier.
Or pastor. Or scholar. It's clean.
Right, and we crave that linearity because, honestly, it's comforting. I mean, we want human lives to fit into neatly labeled boxes so we don't have to work too hard to understand them.
But then you step into the world of Reverend Dr. Antonio Arnold, and suddenly that map is it's completely thrown out the window.
Oh, torn up and thrown away.
Completely. Today, we are taking a custom-tailored deep dive into a really comprehensive collection of essays and biographical excerpts. It's titled The Many Hats of Reverend Dr. Antonio Arnold, A Story of Faith, Service, and Innovation.
And we need to tell you right now, the map he draws is controversial.
Yeah, I need to make that very clear right up front. He challenges established laws, gender dynamics, centuries of theology. And we aren't here to take sides or, tell you if his map represents the absolute truth.
Right. We are just impartially unpacking these perspectives to better understand his worldview.
Exactly. Our mission today is to figure out how surviving a freezing childhood duplex translates into counseling trauma victims and eventually completely rewriting biblical geography.
It is a massive multidimensional scope. We are acting as your guides through his specific, often really provocative lens.
Okay, let's unpack this. And to do that, we have to start at the very beginning. We need to trace how his incredibly resourceful and frankly tough childhood directly shaped his military and spiritual identity.
Yeah, it really sets the stage.
Picture 1930s era housing in Petersburg, Virginia, specifically this duplex on Halifax Street. He paints this vivid picture of a kitchen lit by a single light bulb hanging from a wire with a pull string.
Just one bulb.
One bulb. And the entire heating system was just this wood and coal potbelly stove.
The environmental details he provides are just so visceral. I mean, he describes taking showers during massive rainstorms using water heated in an old pot on that potbelly stove.
Wow.
Yeah, and he even jokes about the house coming equipped with free AC in the winter because the insulation was so non-existent.
That is rough.
It is. But the crucial mechanism here isn't just the poverty or the cold, it's the intense discipline required to survive it. His father was a Korean War veteran, a retired master sergeant who ran that duplex with incredibly high, uncompromising standards.
It really sounds like a boot camp before actual boot camp. I mean, Arnold and his brother were out there cutting firewood, figuring out how to safely manage coal ash without, burning the whole house down.
Right, which is a real danger.
And they were making their beds to strict military standards every single morning before they were even allowed to leave for school. You just have to wonder how that early daily survival training shaped his entire worldview.
Well, it didn't just teach him discipline, it taught him this relentless hustle. By the time he's a teenager, he's mowing a neighbor's massive yard for $5, sweeping floors at the local barbershop. And then he discovers electronics.
Yes, the electronics.
What's fascinating here is that this becomes the defining metaphor for his entire career.
Yeah.
He starts scouring the sidewalks, finding discarded, completely broken televisions.
Just trash on the street.
Literally trash. And he drags them home, diagnoses the broken components, repairs them, and sells them for a 100% profit.
That's incredible.
Right. He develops this fundamental operating system for his life. He takes something society has discarded, identifies the broken mechanism, and restores it to full function.
We are going to see that exact impulse show up again and again. But first, he takes that discipline straight into the military. He spends 22 years in the armed forces, starting in the Army Reserve as an infantry officer.
But the real pivot point happens on September 11, 2001.
Yeah, he's actually working a night shift at a jail, sees the towers fall in the news, and his immediate reaction is to call his old unit, trying to get deployed back into the infantry.
But the Army didn't have a spot for him in that specific capacity at that moment, so he pivots. He joins the Air Guard as a civil engineer.
Talk about adaptability.
Exactly. He eventually becomes a 100% disabled veteran and later answers the call to serve as a military chaplain.
And he doesn't just treat the chaplaincy as, like, a Sunday service obligation. He digs intensely into the legal mechanics of warfare.
Yeah, he writes an entire essay on the Geneva Convention, zeroing in specifically on Article 33.
Which, if you aren't familiar with military law, you might assume a chaplain is just a spiritual nice-to-have on a base. But Arnold points out that under international law, they are highly protected advocates.
Article 33 explicitly protects chaplains and medical personnel. Arnold's analysis highlights that a chaplain in a prisoner of war camp is functioning as an essential link to the outside world, very similar to the Red Cross.
So they aren't just there to pray.
Not at all. They are legally mandated to keep the men's morale up, advise the camp commander on humane treatment, and literally act as a lifeline in an incredibly hostile environment. They are actively triaging the psychological well-being of captured soldiers.
And he realizes that international law could only protect a soldier's physical body in a POW camp. But when they came home, their minds were entirely unprotected against a completely different kind of system.
Right, the civilian healthcare apparatus.
Exactly. He goes from the literal battlefield to the psychological battlefield. He begins working in counseling and runs headfirst into the reality of modern insurance.
Yeah, when he transitions into pastoral counseling, he observes that health maintenance organizations, HMOs and insurance companies, have severely restricted how long a therapist can actually see a patient.
Which is such a massive problem.
It is. The traditional model of long-term, multi-year psychoanalysis is practically dead for the average person. The system forces what is clinically known as brief therapy.
And that usually limits a counselor to just, 3 to 5 sessions with a patient?
Around there, yeah.
If you're dealing with traumatized veterans or people in severe crisis, you'd think they need years of therapy. How does he pull that off in just a few hours?
Well, he adopts a method called solution-focused pastoral counseling, or SFPC. And the mechanism of SFPC is fascinating because it fundamentally flips traditional therapy on its head.
How so?
Instead of spending 5 sessions endlessly digging up the root cause of the trauma, the counselor actively looks for exceptions.
Exceptions.
Yeah. They ask the patient to identify the moments when the problem is not happening, and then they aggressively build a practical solution around those brief moments of stability.
Oh, wow. This is exactly like the broken televisions on the sidewalk.
Yes, that is the exact parallel.
Instead of taking the whole human mind apart and agonizing over every burned-out wire from their past, he is isolating the one working circuit, the solution, and using that to get the person functioning again.
Exactly. He is bypassing the chronological history of the damage to focus purely on restoring operational capacity.
But I have to push back here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If SFPC is forced to be short-term, strictly because an insurance company won't pay for more sessions, how does that reconcile with the deep-seated long-term trauma of something like domestic abuse? I mean, Arnold writes about abuse extensively, and you can't just find a working circuit and cure abuse in 3 sessions?
That is a very fair point, and Arnold readily acknowledges the brutal reality of that limitation. He reconciles it by treating SFPC strictly as immediate crisis intervention.
Like triage.
Exactly. The goal of brief therapy in his practice isn't to permanently cure a lifetime of trauma before the insurance runs out. The goal is to stop the bleeding.
Okay, that makes more sense.
It's to get the person back to a baseline coping level quickly so they aren't in immediate danger. And then you integrate them into a supportive, long-term community environment like a church ministry for the actual sustained healing process.
And he understands that trauma intimately, too. In his deeply personal essay, Abuse in Marital Relationships, he details his own history.
Yeah, it's a very heavy piece.
It really is. He writes about being in a relationship with a female partner where he was falsely accused, isolated from his family, verbally abused, and constantly threatened.
And he describes the terrifier dynamic of his partner weaponizing the justice system against him, knowing that if the police were called, he would automatically be viewed as the aggressor simply because he was a man.
Right. And to contextualize his personal experience, Arnold turns to statistical analysis. He dives into university studies and Department of Justice data from the late 90s and early 2000s.
He does this to point out what he perceives as a massive statistical blind spot in society.
Yeah, he brings up a University of Florida study pointing out that 32% of college women reported being the perpetrators of violence in dating scenarios compared to 24% of men.
Right.
And he argues that despite these numbers showing a very complex reality, men are overwhelmingly treated as the default aggressors by a biased court system.
Now, looking at this objectively, Arnold is using these statistics as a call for the equal application of the law.
Which is an important distinction.
Definitely. He is arguing that the justice system relies on outdated gender assumptions rather than evaluating the actual evidence of psychological and physical abuse.
And we are just reporting his views here. But for Arnold, highlighting these numbers is a plea for mandatory premarital education and a legal framework that protects victims regardless of their gender.
Right. He just wants the system to be objective.
Well, if you're listening to this and trying to map his ideas onto your own understanding of history, you might be feeling a bit of vertigo right about now.
Oh, for sure.
Because that willingness to look at an established system, whether it's the courts or insurance companies, and point out its biases, it bleeds directly into his theological scholarship. He doesn't just challenge modern institutions. He challenges centuries of established European biblical interpretation.
Yeah, in his essay, Africa or Cush in the Bible, he fundamentally redraws the historical and geographic map of the world.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Picture the globe in your head right now. Picture the map you've stared at in classrooms your whole life.
Okay, got it.
Arnold basically takes an eraser to the borders we've been told are permanent and natural. He argues that the term Middle East is a completely artificial geographical distinction.
Completely made up.
Yeah, he says it was created by the British Empire just to control resources and divide native populations.
According to Arnold's geographical and scriptural analysis, the Middle East is historically, ethnically, and geographically African.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge! He points to the book of Genesis, analyzing the rivers flowing from Eden. He notes that these rivers, including the Euphrates in modern-day Iraq, encompass the ancient land of Cush and Assyria.
Right.
Therefore, he asserts, the true biblical borders of Africa extend all the way up to the Euphrates River.
And because he moves that massive geographic border, he inherently reclaims the ethnic identity of the people within it. He asserts that major biblical figures like Abraham, Moses, and Jesus were people of color.
Yes, and he specifically takes aim at the widespread traditional European depiction of Jesus, with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Right, which he says is totally inaccurate.
He traces that specific European visual representation back to the year 1492.
1492.
Yeah. Arnold asserts that Pope Alexander VI commissioned Leonardo da Vinci to paint biblical figures, and that the model used to depict Jesus was actually the Pope's own son, Cesare Borgia.
Wait, really? So he is saying the image of Jesus that billions of people grew up praying to is actually a 15th century Italian nobleman?
That is exactly his argument. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of his life's work, theology for Arnold is not just an abstract academic exercise.
No, it feels very personal.
It is a profound act of dismantling colonial narratives. By arguing that the original people of Israel and Saudi Arabia are Cushite, he is actively reclaiming a lost heritage for his community.
Oh, I see.
He views the rewriting of the Bible's African origins as a historical theft that needs to be corrected. Very much like a false accusation in a courtroom needs to be overturned.
That makes total sense. And he applies the same lens of historical reclamation to other massive figures in church history, too.
Yeah.
And he always focuses on the brokenness before the triumph. Well, look at John Knox, the leader of the Scottish Reformation. Knox is usually remembered for his fiery preaching and his highly controversial writings arguing against female rulers.
Right. Specifically targeting Queen Mary Tudor.
Exactly. But Arnold bypasses the controversies to highlight Knox's origin story. He was a tortured galley slave on a French fleet for 19 months.
19 months chained to an oar. His physical health was ruined forever.
Yeah. Arnold frames Knox as a man forged in the absolute fires of persecution. And he does the exact same thing with the Apostle Peter.
Oh, Peter's a great example.
He tracks Peter's evolution from a deeply flawed, impulsive fisherman, a guy who literally fell asleep during Jesus' most agonizing hour in the garden, and who denied him 3 times just to save his own skin, into the ultimate rock of the early church.
It's that TV repair mechanism again.
Yes.
Arnold loves the narrative of the completely broken human being, the discarded slave, the cowardly disciple. The one who is diagnosed, repaired, and repurposed for a massive mission.
He really does.
He sees the divine operating through the exceptions, the exact same way he looks for exceptions in a brief therapy session.
So how does this apply to you and me on a Tuesday? I mean, after you've survived a freezing duplex, navigated severe personal trauma, and spent your time dismantling historical empires and redrawing biblical maps, how does Arnold suggest we actually live our daily lives?
Well, he grounds all of this high-level theology in very practical, everyday psychology. You see this most clearly in his review of Dr. Henry Cloud's book, 9 Things You Simply Must Do to Succeed in Love and Life.
Oh, I've heard of that one. Arnold focuses heavily on what Cloud calls déjà vu people, right?
Exactly. These are highly successful individuals who come from completely different backgrounds, different industries, and different economic circumstances.
But they share traits.
Yes, they all share distinct, repeatable behavioral patterns. When you watch them navigate life, you get déjà vu because their methods for handling adversity are structurally identical.
And Arnold pulls out two highly surprising, almost counterintuitive takeaways from this behavioral pattern. The first is his strong endorsement of a concept called hating well.
Hating well.
So what does this all mean? Because there is a massive paradox staring us in the face here. You have a Christian pastor, a man whose entire profession is dedicated to a gospel of ultimate love and forgiveness, actively advocating for hating. And his second point, not playing fair.
It sounds totally contradictory until you look at the psychological framing behind it.
Okay, explain that.
For Arnold, hating well does not mean harboring malice against a person based on prejudice or spite.
Right.
He uses the book of Proverbs to point out that even God hates certain things, specifically behaviors like a lying tongue or hands that shed innocent blood. Arnold argues that hating evil, hating toxic behavior, or hating a destructive situation is actually a vital biological protective mechanism.
It's your internal alarm system.
Precisely.
If you don't actively hate the toxicity, you will slowly learn to tolerate it. And that ties directly into his pushback against the golden rule of playing fair. Arnold argues that strictly playing fair can actually ruin your life.
Because if playing fair means exposing yourself, your family, or your business to toxic, exploitative people who have absolutely no intention of playing by those same rules, then playing fair isn't noble.
It's just self-sabotage.
It is. It's a trap.
Think about his essay on abuse. If you are dealing with a partner who is perfectly willing to weaponize the police and lie to isolate you, giving them the benefit of the doubt or trying to fight fair is incredibly dangerous.
You have to establish absolute impenetrable boundaries.
And that realization is the synthesis of his entire life's work. Refusing to play fair with toxic people and learning to hate destructive behavior are profound boundary-setting tools.
They really are.
They are lessons born directly from his survival in Petersburg, his strict discipline in the military, and his endurance through severe personal abuse.
It's incredible. Arnold's journey from shoveling coal into a potbelly stove just to stay warm, to counseling trauma victims under the ticking clock of HMO insurance limits, to literally rewriting the geographic and ethnic maps of biblical history. It all demonstrates a relentless, almost aggressive pursuit of the truth.
He fundamentally refuses to accept the default settings of the world.
He really does.
So why should you care about any of this? Because Arnold's life challenges us to examine the invisible scripts running our own lives.
That's the real takeaway here.
He looked at the map of the Middle East and said, that border is fake. He looked at the rules of a toxic relationship and said, playing fair here will destroy me. He teaches us that just because a map is widely printed or a rule is widely accepted by society doesn't mean it's accurate or healthy for you.
Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take an eraser to the map you were handed.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If the maps of our ancient history and the rules of fair play can be challenged so thoroughly, what fundamental assumption in your own life is actually just a leftover border drawn by someone else?
That's a great question to leave on.
We started this deep dive talking about the straight lines of a biography, looking for a clean, linear path. But maybe the real truth and the real healing is found when you finally realize the map you've been following was wrong all along. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep questioning the map.
Until next time, keep exploring.